summers ago, I took the opportunity to stop off for some days on a Caribbean island on the return journey from student volunteer work and travelling with friends in Ecuador. The sun was shining, the sand was white, the sea was clear, and I had never felt more alone. I hated it, cutting short my trip to get an early flight home. Current government guidance requires isolation for those with COVID symptoms or a positive test, along with their households. This is true for households up and down the country, including in university settings. Isolation can elicit very different responses depending on the circumstances. Isolation can be one of the cruelest forms of punishment. The UN considers that solitary confinement beyond 15 days is a form of torture on account of the psychological damage it inflicts. And being alone can be difficult and fearful even when it is chosen. Without people around to offer perspective and reassurance, it's all too easy to get stuck in mental loops of recurring thoughts. Isolation is especially difficult for people who use being occupied as a coping mechanism for deep-seated anxieties and traumas, and who find that they have less distractions. Of course, on the other hand, isolation, some space alone, might be just the thing we crave, especially after meeting lots of new people at the start of term. This craving for headspace is also well known to people with young children. The idea of being solitary is familiar across religious traditions. Jesus practiced and taught solitary prayer throughout his ministry, from the 40 days in the wilderness at the beginning to the Garden of Gethsemane at the end. Monastic traditions of all sorts have developed the practice of solitary prayer. A notable example being the anchorite Simeon Stylites, who spent 37 years on top of a pillar in 5th century Syria, the length some people will go for peace and quiet. Examples of religious self-isolation testify that it is not an easy undertaking, but requires mental and emotional discipline and toil. Isolation can, however, also be a fruitful context for spiritual growth and reflection. Of course, for many religious believers, private prayer is not about being alone, but turning our attention to God who is present with us. Some, like Augustine in his Confessions, describe transformative experiences of mystical union with God, precious and rare moments of overwhelming connection. How can we do isolation well if we find that we have to? It would be worth being intentional as we consider a new routine or pattern of life. Such planning could help ensure variety during the day and could be the basis for a commitment to practices like prayer and meditation. Most importantly, just as social distancing should be called physical distancing, isolation should be called physical isolation. The point is we need to take every opportunity to have social connection even while maintaining physical isolation, by making use of phones as phones and social media that can connect us at distance. Reaching out to others is especially needed for those for whom going into the isolation feels like facing the devil in the wilderness. Members of Fitzwilliam must always feel no hesitation in contacting the welfare support team here in college. Being in isolation does not need to feel like being alone. In prayer, we are not alone, and in college, even if physically isolated, we remain a community.